Ever cut someone off and never looked back? Right, I did, if so.
Are you ready for a shocking truth? Yesterday, I learned that while I was overseas, my brother slid into my wife's life like it was an empty seat, and then my parents looked me in the eye and asked me to keep the family together. I broke every polite rule and won. That is not a sentence I ever thought I would say out loud, but here we are. Let me take you back to the moment it started unraveling, because nothing prepares you for betrayal that wears your own last name. I had just gotten back from deployment, still trying to shake off the routine of living out of a bag, when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from my mom. It sounded innocent enough on the surface, but something about her tone made me pause. She said there was a small situation at home, but she needed me to be calm and not blow things out of proportion. You can probably imagine how that landed. After months away, serving, working, putting my life on hold, the first thing I hear is not welcome back, but a warning to control my reaction. When I walked into my parents' house that weekend, everything felt off. My wife Julia was sitting there, but not next to me, not waiting for me, not even looking like someone who had missed me. Instead, she was on the couch beside my younger brother Evan, laughing a little too comfortably at something he said. My parents were circling like referees in a game they had already decided the outcome of. They launched into a speech about family unity, about supporting one another in times of weakness, and about not letting temporary mistakes ruin what we had built together. That was when I knew this was not a misunderstanding. This was a cover-up. I listened while they talked at me, nodding slowly, trying to collect the pieces. Julia had apparently found comfort in Evan while I was gone, and instead of outrage, my parents were practically auditioning for a role in a public relations campaign. They wanted me to sit there, smile, and pretend this wasn't the lowest blow I had ever received. Evan had the nerve to keep his arms stretched out along the back of the couch, like this was his seat now. He even slipped up, mentioning he had been handling bills and using our place when he talked about my home. The gall of it would almost be funny if it hadn't been my life. At that moment, I realized they weren't actually asking me for forgiveness or even an explanation. They were asking me to co-sign their version of events, to nod along while they erased what really happened, to carry the family's image on my back while they trampled over everything else. My mother even said it outright. "People talk, Nora. We just need you to keep this quiet and keep us together. Quiet. Together." Those were the words they wanted me to swallow. Instead of blowing up, I did something they didn't expect. I leaned in. I asked calm, practical questions. "So, you're saying Julia is living with Evan now? You're saying you used my card for bills while I was overseas? You're saying you want me to stand next to you all at church and smile?" They nodded, relieved, thinking I was agreeing. What they didn't realize was that I was memorizing every word. I kept my phone on the table recording my own voice notes, repeating things back to them for clarity. They didn't catch on. They never think I'm the one collecting receipts. I left that night without committing to anything. I hugged no one, kissed no one, and promised nothing. I told them I'd think about it and be in touch. On the way out, my father squeezed my shoulder and muttered, "It'll all make sense once you calm down." That was the moment I decided calm would be my weapon. If they expected me to explode so they could call me irrational, I was going to do the opposite. I was going to be surgical. That same evening, I went home and started moving fast. I changed my phone passcode, updated my bank alerts, and moved my important documents into a private storage unit. I combed through my accounts and found the first red flag, a car insurance charge that didn't make sense. Evan had been driving my vehicle like it belonged to him. I flagged it, saved the statement, and made a list. That was line 1 in the ledger. They wanted me to be the peacekeeper, the glue, the quiet soldier who takes the hit so the family doesn't look messy to the outside world. Instead, I walked out of that house with a mission. They had no idea that every sentence they fed me had just become Exhibit A in a case I was building one step at a time. They thought I would take the betrayal and bury it. They thought they could shame me into silence with the words, "Keep the family together." But the truth is, they had already torn it apart. And now I was going to show them, piece by piece, what happens when you hand the wrong person the role of fixer. They wanted a peacekeeper. I brought a ledger. And the first number on it was a car I did not drive. By the time the weekend passed, I had already gathered more evidence than I ever thought I'd need for people who used to call themselves my family. What shocked me most wasn't even the affair, that, painful as it was, could almost be explained by loneliness, distance, weakness, whatever excuse they felt like offering. No, what stayed with me was how organized their version of reality had become while I was gone. The story wasn't just being rewritten, it had been printed, rehearsed, and distributed like a press release. I wasn't supposed to question it. I was supposed to accept my role as the one who takes the hit so the rest of them could go on pretending nothing happened. The first real clue that something deeper was going on came when I pulled up my banking app and noticed a series of payments I never authorized. At first, it looked like small things: a furniture store I had never stepped foot in, an internet provider in a zip code that wasn't mine, and then something bigger, a second phone line added to my wireless account, all while I was overseas. When I called to ask about it, the rep read off a familiar name from the account, Julia. Apparently, she'd used my power of attorney to make changes for convenience. I wasn't even surprised, just methodical. I asked for copies of every signed document, then requested a freeze and removal of her access, citing fraud if necessary. That same day, I went over to the building where we used to live, where I used to live, and apparently where Julia and Evan were now spending most of their time. I didn't go inside. I just parked across the street and waited. And right on cue, Evan came strolling out, wearing a hoodie I recognized, mine, and laughing into a phone call like nothing in the world could touch him. Julia followed about 5 minutes later, holding a takeout bag, and they got into my car together. Not our car. My car. The car I'd left parked at my parents' place for safekeeping. It was insulting how little they tried to hide it. But then again, maybe they didn't think they had to. Maybe they figured I'd be too ashamed or too stunned to fight back. They had forgotten who they were dealing with. Later that night, I called a friend of mine who used to work in base legal. I didn't ask for anything drastic, just advice on how to quietly revoke permissions and document everything without triggering alarms. He gave me exactly what I needed: scripts, steps, language that protects you without escalating. He reminded me that silence doesn't mean surrender. It can mean preparation. That became my new mantra. At dinner the next day, my mother slipped in one of her classic, just being honest remarks, casually mentioning that Evan had helped cover some bills with my parents while I was away. I asked which ones, and she brushed it off, saying it wasn't important and that I shouldn't dig into it. That was the moment I knew for sure they were hiding something financial. Evan was not helping. He was being helped. And they wanted me to unknowingly absorb the cost so they wouldn't have to admit they'd backed the wrong horse. Julia, meanwhile, tried a different tactic. She sent me a message that was exactly the tone she knew would get under my skin: soft, confused, vaguely apologetic, with just enough guilt to keep me engaged. She said she missed talking to me, that things had moved too fast, that she hadn't planned for any of this, and that she just needed time to think. She didn't ask how I was doing. She didn't ask what I needed. She just wanted to know if I'd keep paying the rent for a little while longer until she figured out her next steps. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I went into the shared account where the rent was pulled from and set the next payment to bounce. I didn't delete the account. I just let it run dry. I removed my name from the lease using the clause we had agreed to before I left. It had been written in as a just-in-case, and now it was the cleanest exit I had. When the payment failed, the landlord would call her, not me. The final move that week was simple, but surgical. I filed a revocation of the power of attorney that Julia had used. I timestamped it, signed it in front of a notary, and made 5 copies. One went into my personal storage unit. One I emailed to the bank. One I sent to our insurance provider. One to my lawyer. And one I slid into an envelope and left on the kitchen counter at my parents' house, unsealed, just waiting to be found. I didn't have to write a note. The document spoke loud enough. By the end of the week, I had changed all my passwords, rerouted every recovery email, removed every auto payment tied to shared accounts, and filed a quiet fraud report for the phone line Julia opened. I wasn't interested in pressing charges. Not yet. I just wanted a paper trail. Something with dates. Something undeniable. They still hadn't figured out that I wasn't playing defense anymore. Every polite smile, every silence, every time I said, "I'll think about it," was a countdown. I wasn't going to shout or cry or beg for justice. I was going to calculate. Because the furniture they bought with my name? I had the receipt. The phone bill they racked up? I had the call logs. The neighbor across the hall? She texted me a video of Evan using my car 3 weeks ago. The lie was unraveling on its own. All I had to do now was let it breathe. Let them keep pretending. Let them keep digging. The next move would be the one that made them realize they hadn't just betrayed me, they'd underestimated me. When Julia reached out again, it wasn't an apology, and it wasn't remorse. Not really. What it was, if I'm being honest, was a negotiation attempt disguised as sentiment. She asked if we could meet alone, said she just wanted to talk without everyone's opinions in the way, and for a brief second, I allowed myself to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was something in her voice that sounded like regret. But then the meeting happened, and I saw it for what it was, not a conversation, not even a confession, but a pitch. She started with flattery, reminding me how stable I had always been, how responsible I was, how lucky she had been to be with someone who understood the weight of things. And then, without missing a beat, she slid right into her request. She wanted to stay on my health insurance, just until the end of the year, because her new job didn't kick in for a while and she was still seeing her therapist. Then she added something that nearly made me laugh out loud. She asked if she could keep the spare key to the apartment, just in case. I didn't say anything right away. I let her talk. I watched her eyes dart down when she mentioned my brother's name, as if trying to figure out how to present that part of her life without losing too much ground. She referred to their situation as complicated and said they weren't labeling anything yet, which was rich considering the number of charges I'd seen tied to joint purchases in both their names. I asked her, calmly, if she had used my card to buy the sofa that now sat in the apartment. She blinked, hesitated, and said, "I thought it was a shared account." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just nodded and said I understood. And then I pulled a folder from my bag. Inside was a printed list of every unauthorized charge, every account modification, every use of my power of attorney without written consent. I laid it on the table and asked her to sign a receipt acknowledging she'd reviewed it. She didn't touch the pen. She stared at the list like it was written in another language, then said, "This feels aggressive." I replied, just as evenly, that it wasn't aggressive. It was documentation. Something I'd been taught to do in training, not to fight, but to protect. When she walked out that day, she didn't say goodbye. She just said she hoped I would reconsider the insurance thing. And that was all I needed to hear to know exactly how the next few weeks would play out. What I hadn't expected, though, was the follow-up message from Evan later that night. He didn't call. He sent a voice memo, 2 minutes of the most passive-aggressive guilt trip I'd ever heard. He told me he was sorry things had turned out this way, and that he never intended to hurt me, and that I should really think about what kind of person I wanted to be going forward. He told me not to let anger ruin everything we've built as a family, and then, without irony, asked if I'd still be hosting Thanksgiving this year. I replayed that message 3 times, not because I couldn't believe it, but because I wanted to transcribe it accurately for my file. I saved it as evan_message_tchecks.mp3 and uploaded it to a secured drive. If they wanted to keep this professional, I would make it bureaucratic. The next morning, I scheduled 2 back-to-back appointments, one with a benefits consultant to restructure my coverage and remove Julia from every connected policy, and one with a mediator to formally begin separation proceedings. I didn't go to court. Not yet. I wasn't interested in a spectacle. I just wanted a clean slate, on paper, and a record of who did what, when, and why. I also made one more stop that day, a quiet visit to the DMV. I had never transferred the car title out of joint ownership after we married, mostly because it never crossed my mind that it would matter. That day, it did. I submitted the documents, paid the fee, and within 48 hours, the car was fully mine again, legally and visibly. The plates would be changed the following week. No more rides under my name. No more liability. Finally, I went through every account we'd ever opened together and systematically removed Julia's name. If that wasn't an option, I closed the account entirely. I kept copies of every closure confirmation, every customer service chat transcript, and every transaction history PDF. I organized them by date, labeled them clearly, and filed them where only I could access them. They still didn't see it coming. They were still sending me soft messages and vague promises, pretending this was a gray area instead of a clean betrayal. They wanted to keep things informal, emotional, and undefined. They wanted me trapped in let's talk while they drained what they could and rewrote the story to suit their version. But by then, the story was already in motion and I was the one writing it. The mediator asked me a question near the end of our first session. She looked me in the eye and said, "Are you hoping for reconciliation or resolution?" And without flinching, I told her I was hoping for math, just facts, clean lines, numbers that added up. Because love may have brought us together, but it was the lies that gave me clarity. And now it was time for clarity to do its job. It wasn't just the betrayal anymore, it was the performance they expected me to give after the curtain had already dropped. My parents, somehow still committed to the fantasy that all of this was salvageable, began sending me little invitations to rejoin their world as if nothing had happened. First, it was a simple family dinner, just the five of us, with my mother emphasizing that there's no pressure, of course, but it would mean a lot if you came. Then it escalated, volunteer day at church, a photo op for the local paper about our generational service, even a suggestion that I should speak during Veterans Day to remind people what family sacrifice looks like. That one nearly made me laugh, but I didn't. I just wrote it all down. What they were asking, without having the honesty to say it out loud, was for me to play along. They didn't want peace. They wanted optics. They didn't want me to heal. They wanted me to perform. And if I didn't? Well, then I was the one tearing the family apart. I was the one holding on to grudges. I was the one making it hard for everyone. My silence was not seen as dignity, it was treated as a problem to be managed. So, I did what I always do, I stayed calm and I took inventory. At this point, the story my parents were telling the outside world was already shifting into something unrecognizable. According to them, Julia and I had grown apart and Evan had simply been there during a difficult time. There were no timelines mentioned, no explanations given, and definitely no acknowledgement of the fact that their son had effectively stepped into the space I left behind while I was risking my life abroad. The church community, most of whom only knew what they were told over potlucks and prayer circles, was starting to offer me sympathetic glances paired with clueless comments like, "You're so brave to stay so quiet," or "Families go through tough seasons." It was a level of gaslighting that took my breath away, but not my voice. I contacted the church directly, not to make a scene, but to send a private note to the administrative assistant who coordinated public events. In my email, I thanked her for the invitation and gently declined, citing ongoing personal matters and asking for understanding while I stepped back from any group participation. I did not mention Julia. I did not name Evan. I simply removed myself from the stage they were trying to drag me back onto. Her reply was kind and curious. She wrote, "Thank you for being honest. That's not quite what I heard, but I respect your space." That sentence told me everything. My parents had already rewritten the story and passed it around like a prayer request. Meanwhile, Julia tried to retrieve a package from our old apartment, technically still under my name. She texted, asking if I could leave it with the doorman. Instead, I told her I'd be there in person to hand it over. When she arrived, Evan came with her, standing by the car like he was there to supervise. I stepped outside, handed her the box, and asked, directly and calmly, for the wedding band she still had. She blinked, surprised, like I had caught her off guard with something so basic and final. She looked at Evan, who rolled his eyes and muttered something under his breath, then turned back to me and said, "Do we really need to make this so transactional?" I said yes. Yes, we do. A neighbor across the hall, who had seen the two of them coming and going for weeks, later texted me that she had witnessed the whole thing. "They looked uncomfortable," she wrote, "like kids being sent to the principal's office." I didn't respond. I just took a screenshot and added it to my file. I wasn't building a case to go to war. I was building one to end this quietly, cleanly, and on my terms. Later that week, I sent my parents a letter, not a text, not an email, but a printed, signed letter delivered to their mailbox. It was short, direct, and impossible to misinterpret. I told them that since they had asked me to help keep the family together, I was doing exactly that by staying honest. I laid out 3 bullet points. 1. Julia used my power of attorney without consent. 2. Evan benefited financially and logistically from that misuse. 3. Both of them continued to operate under my name and credit even after I returned. No accusations. No shouting. Just facts. I ended the letter with a sentence they couldn't flip. I will no longer participate in events that require me to lie to myself or others. That was it. No emotional manipulation. No room for interpretation. My father called me less than 10 minutes after the letter was delivered. He didn't yell. He didn't apologize. He just opened with, "You blindsided us." As if truth, presented plainly, without drama, was the real betrayal. And that's when I knew I had taken the power back. Because for the first time in this entire mess, they weren't managing the story anymore. They were reacting to mine. It was never going to end with a blowout. Not for people like them. They didn't yell, didn't scream, didn't even argue in ways that were honest. They manipulated, they maneuvered, they positioned. And so when they called me asking for one final conversation, a sit-down, just the 5 of us, to clear the air and decide how to move forward as a family, I knew exactly what they wanted. They didn't want truth. They wanted containment. They wanted to put a lid on the mess, tie a ribbon around it, and pretend the package was still presentable. And more than anything, they wanted me to be the one who held the lid shut, who played the part of the reasonable one, the steady one, the woman who could take betrayal and wear it like a badge of grace. I said yes. Not because I wanted reconciliation, and definitely not because I believed anything meaningful would come out of it. I said yes, because this was the moment I had been building toward, not with rage, not with revenge fantasies, but with structure, facts, and the kind of steady preparation that makes people underestimate you until it's far too late. The dinner was scheduled for a Sunday evening at my parents' house. Same table where we'd had holidays, birthdays, welcome home dinners after deployments. Only this time, I wasn't the one returning. I was the one closing the door. I arrived exactly on time, carrying nothing but a slim folder. No emotion on my face, no anger in my step. Just calm, deliberate presence. Evan was already there, sitting back in his chair like he belonged at the head of something. Julia looked like she'd dressed for a job interview, neat, controlled, careful. My mother had set the table like it was Easter, right down to the candles and matching napkins. My father, of course, stood like a mediator, arms crossed, as if he could hold the balance of the room through posture alone. No one reached for a plate. My mother began with a speech, something about misunderstandings, about how family doesn't always follow clean lines, and how people make mistakes under stress. She called what happened complicated, as though the word would soften what was, in truth, an orchestrated dismantling of my life. She looked at me with watery eyes and said, "We're asking you, Nora, to be the one who sets the tone. You've always been the strong one." I didn't respond. I just opened the folder and began laying the contents on the table. First came the printed timeline, a simple chart showing the dates of my deployment, the dates of Julia's first unauthorized card use, the date Evan changed the locks on my old apartment, and the first day they were both seen at the building by the neighbor who had kept every camera timestamp. Then came the credit reports showing the sudden spike in shared account usage while I was out of the country, and the emails from customer service reps confirming that changes were made using my credentials without a formal request. My mother's face tightened. My father leaned forward like he was trying to make out fine print that didn't exist. Evan smirked, then looked at Julia, waiting for her to take the lead. And she did, sort of. She leaned forward and whispered, "Is this really necessary?" To which I replied, without raising my voice, "Yes. Because this is the part where we stop pretending that what happened was an accident." Then I handed them each a copy of a letter addressed to our church pastor, which I had already emailed privately that morning. The letter did not accuse, did not insult, and did not expose private details. It simply informed the church that I would be stepping down from all family-facing events indefinitely and that, while I remained committed to service and community, I would not participate in any environment that demanded I suppress or distort the truth. Finally, I gave Julia a sealed envelope that contained a drafted separation agreement prepared by my lawyer. It required no court appearance, offered a clean break of all shared assets, and included an acknowledgement of misused authority. I did not ask her to sign it on the spot. I just handed it to her and said, "This is the version where we both walk away without dragging this through court." For Evan, I had something smaller, a spreadsheet listing the charges he had incurred using my name, alongside a suggested repayment schedule broken into monthly segments. It wasn't legal. It wasn't binding. But it was dated, signed by me, and copied to an email with my attorney's name in the BCC line. I told him, plainly, that this was his one chance to settle things quietly, and that if he preferred to ignore it, I had no problem moving forward with formal channels. And then I stood. I didn't wait for a debate. I didn't need their validation or their permission. I simply said the one sentence that mattered: "You can keep the family together without me." That was it. I gathered the empty folder, stepped away from the table, and walked out without another word. In the days that followed, they tried to reach out. First, it was my father calling late at night. Then Julia texting me with vague lines about regret and not knowing how to make things right. Even Evan sent a screenshot of the spreadsheet with this single line: "This is absurd." I didn't respond to any of them. I didn't post about it. I didn't make announcements. I just changed my locks, finalized the insurance updates, canceled every lingering joint account, and bought myself a new phone under a fresh plan that no one had access to. They had wanted me to carry the weight of their decisions, to pretend that what they did could somehow be undone with time, politeness, or group dinners. But what they didn't understand, what they never understood, was that I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. They built their story. I stepped out of it. And now, when people ask me about my family, I just smile and say, I left them exactly where they wanted to be, together.